Supreme Commander Corvus's mandibles clicked furiously as he stared at the holographic display of 500,000 human warships appearing from the blackness of space like vengeful demons materializing from the void, poised to ravage his once thought invincible fleet and crush his dreams of conquering the lowly human world. It was the year 2170, and for the last century, the militaristic and technologically advanced Raman Empire had swept across the galaxy, conquering and subjugating every species they encountered. With each successive victory, the Ramans grew more assured of their superiority, believing themselves to be the most powerful civilization in the universe. But there was one species they had not yet crushed under their heel: the humans of Earth. The Ramans viewed humans as primitive and weak, barely worth the effort to conquer. But Supreme Commander Corvus was not one to leave a job unfinished. He assembled a massive invasion fleet and set course for Earth, eager to claim the planet as another jewel in the Raman Empire's crown. As Corvus's ships approached the human system, they detected an unexpected energy signature emanating from the edge of the solar system. Corvus ordered his fleet to investigate, expecting to find a feeble human outpost or some laughable attempt at resistance. Instead, the Ramans were confronted by a sight that shook them to their core. Rising up to meet them was a vast armada of advanced human warships, bristling with weapons and shielding technology that put the Raman fleet to shame. This was the Earth Defense Force, a secret project that brilliant human scientist and strategist Edward Mason had spent decades assembling in hidden shipyards scattered throughout the solar system. Mason had long foreseen the Raman threat, and knew that Earth's only hope was to build a fleet powerful enough to repel any invasion. In secret, he poured Earth's resources into constructing 500,000 state-of-the-art battleships, destroyers, and carriers. He recruited the best minds and the bravest hearts from across the planet to crew his ships. And now, as the Raman fleet bore down on Earth, Mason's secret armada was ready to be unveiled. As the two fleets faced off against each other, the fate of Earth and the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. If the Earth Defense Force failed, the Ramans would subjugate the planet, enslaving and exploiting its people. Humanity's last hope for freedom rested on the shoulders of Edward Mason and the brave men and women of the EDF. As Mason's team and the Raman forces exchanged fire in a fierce dogfight around the planet killer, Edward realized the Ramans were already adapting to EDF tactics. Corvus barked out orders in harsh clicks to regroup his fleet. "Launch the ion torpedoes. Target their flanking ships," Corvus commanded. A barrage of glowing blue torpedoes streaked from the Raman ships towards the EDF flanks. Mason gritted his teeth. "Zephyr, analyze those torpedo energy signatures now. We need a counter." The AI's digital face flickered on Mason's view screen. Energy signature analyzed. Deploying countermeasure in 3, 2, 1. The EDF ships' hulls shimmered as a new energy shielding enveloped them. The ion torpedoes struck the barriers and, instead of detonating, suddenly reversed course. They flew back at the Raman ships and slammed into them, ripping open holes and spilling fire. Corvus slammed a clawed fist on his console, mandibles flaring in rage at the humans' resilience. He hailed Mason's ship directly. The Supreme Commander's red eyes bore into Mason. "This is your last chance, human. Surrender now, and your people may yet live. Persist in this futile resistance, and you doom your entire world." Mason stared back, unflinching. "We'll never submit to you, Corvus. Earth will fight to its last breath before bowing to Raman rule." "Then prepare to watch your planet burn," Corvus snarled. His image vanished, replaced by a pulsing red hologram, a massive spherical weapon filled with spikes. "Behold the planet killer. Surrender or I will reduce your Earth to atoms." Mason zoomed in on the schematic, mind racing. A weapon that size had to have a weakness. He punched the comms. "Dr. Zahn, we need a structural analysis on that planet killer schematic we stole, and we need it now." As Zahn's team frantically pored over the weapon specs, Mason knew he had to buy time. "Striker Wing, break off and hit those Raman supply ships. Pull as many of them away from the planet killer as you can." The diversion worked. Corvus peeled off a sizable chunk of his fleet to guard the supplies, leaving the planet killer exposed. Seeing his chance, Mason gunned his engines. "Red Squadron, form up on me. We're going to take out that superweapon." As they closed in, scores of Riemann fighters swarmed to intercept them. Lances of plasma crisscrossed space. Ships on both sides bloomed into fireballs. Mason jinked hard, but a shot still clipped his wing. Alarms blared in his cockpit, but he pushed on. Zahn's face suddenly appeared on Mason's screen, eyes wide. "Edward, I found it. A thermal exhaust port leading right to the planet killer's core. A direct hit will start a chain reaction and destroy it from within." Armor peeling away, engines trailing smoke, Mason lined up on the planet killer's port. He had only one shot. Around him, the battle raged, fire and fury in the void. Mason breathed deep, finger tightening on the trigger. Mason's finger squeezed the trigger. The torpedo streaked towards the planet killer's thermal exhaust port. Time seemed to slow as the projectile closed in on its target. Then, impact. For a split second, nothing happened. Suddenly, the superweapon's surface rippled. Cracks of blinding energy spread across its hull like lightning. The planet killer erupted in a massive fireball, engulfing everything nearby. Alarms blared in Mason's cockpit. His ship tumbled end over end, systems failing. Through the view screen, he saw chunks of debris hurtling past. The escape pod light flashed. Mason pulled the lever. He was violently ejected just as his craft disintegrated. The shockwave slammed into his pod, sending it spinning wildly into the void. Mason fought to stay conscious as G-forces crushed him. On the Riemann command ship, Corvus watched in disbelief as his ultimate weapon was reduced to atoms. His mandibles clicked furiously. "All ships, focus fire on the human fleet. Crush them." The space around Earth erupted in chaos. Riemann and human ships exchanged volleys of plasma fire. Explosions dotted the battlefield as vessels on both sides were torn apart. Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the EDF comms. "Mason took out their superweapon. Press the attack." Inspired by their leader's sacrifice, EDF pilots redoubled their efforts. AI-assisted targeting systems allowed them to dance through Riemann formations, striking with surgical precision. A Riemann cruiser erupted in flames as EDF torpedoes found their mark. Nearby, a human destroyer succumbed to concentrated Riemann fire, its hull cracking open. Hours passed. The tide of battle ebbed and flowed. Neither side could gain a clear advantage. Then, a beacon ping. An EDF rescue shuttle located Mason's battered escape pod. They brought him aboard, administering emergency first aid. "Sir, you need medical attention," a medic insisted. Mason waved him off. "No time. Get me to the flagship, now." On the bridge of the EDF command ship, Mason grimaced as he studied tactical displays. Riemann vessels were raining plasma bolts on Earth's surface. "They're targeting population centers," an officer reported. "New York, Beijing, Moscow, all under heavy bombardment." Mason's eyes narrowed. "We need to end this. Fast. Their command ship, that's the key. Take it out and their whole operation falls apart." He outlined a daring plan. Use prototype stealth tech to slip a strike team aboard the Riemann flagship. Disable it from within. "It's a suicide mission," Admiral Chen warned. "Then I'll lead it myself," Mason declared. As the EDF's main force engaged the Riemanns, drawing their attention, Mason's stealth shuttle slipped past their lines. They latched onto the command ship's hull, cutting their way inside. Alarms blared as Mason's team fought through waves of Riemann warriors. Plasma bolts sizzled past. The humans returned fire, downing alien after alien. Finally, they reached the bridge. The doors hissed open. There stood Corvus, mandibles flaring in rage. "You!" the Riemann leader snarled. Mason raised his weapon. "It's over, Corvus." The alien commander lunged. Mason's gun went flying. They grappled furiously, crashing into consoles. Corvus's claws raked Mason's face. Mason drove his knee into the alien's midsection. They traded blows, neither able to gain the upper hand. Gasping, bleeding, Mason spotted an access panel, He dove for it, fingers flying across the controls. A transmission went out to all Riemann ships. Stand down immediately. Corvus roared in fury. He charged at Mason, determined to end the human once and for all. Mason sidestepped at the last second. Corvus crashed into the wall. Before he could recover, Mason was on him. A fierce struggle ensued. With a final burst of strength, Mason slammed Corvus's head into the deck. The alien went limp. Panting, Mason stood. Bridge secure, we've won. Outside, confusion reigned among the Riemann fleet. Many ships stopped firing, unsure what to do. The EDF pressed their advantage. One by one, Riemann vessels began jumping away. Those that remained found themselves quickly overwhelmed by the resurgent human forces. Mason stared out at the stars, allowing himself a small smile. Earth was safe. Humanity had proven itself against its greatest threat yet, but he knew the real work of rebuilding was only beginning. Mason stood on the bridge of the EDF flagship, watching the remnants of the Riemann fleet limp away. His body ached from the brutal fight with Corvus, but a sense of victory coursed through him. That feeling was short-lived. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up something," an officer called out. "It's massive." Mason rushed to the console. His eyes widened as he took in the readings. A vast armada of ships filled the screen, dwarfing even the combined EDF and Riemann fleets. "What the hell is that?" Mason breathed. Before anyone could respond, space itself seemed to rupture. Thousands of alien vessels poured through, their hulls gleaming with strange technology. "Incoming transmission," the comms officer announced. A harsh voice filled the bridge. "We are the Zarin Collective. Your species are obsolete. Prepare for assimilation." The transmission cut off. In its wake, chaos erupted. Zarin weapons lanced out, carving through EDF and Riemann ships alike. Explosions bloomed silently in the void as vessels were torn apart. "All ships evasive maneuvers," Mason bellowed. "Fall back to Earth now." The EDF fleet scattered, desperately trying to avoid the onslaught. But the Zarin were relentless, their weapons and shields far beyond anything humanity had encountered. Mason gripped the command chair as his ship shuddered under enemy fire. "Status report!" "Shields at 30% and falling," an officer replied. "We've lost a third of the fleet already." Mason's mind raced. They couldn't win this fight. Not now. Not like this. He keyed the fleet-wide comm. "All ships, this is Commander Mason. Initiate emergency jump protocols. We need to regroup." As the EDF vessels engaged their drives, Mason noticed the battered Riemann ships were struggling to keep pace. He gritted his teeth, knowing what he had to do. "Corvus, this is Mason. Form up with us. We'll cover your retreat." There was a moment of silence. Then Corvus's gravelly voice came through. "Understood, human. Perhaps you are not entirely without honor." The remains of the once mighty fleets limped towards Earth, hounded every step of the way by Zarin forces. Mason coordinated the retreat, EDF ships providing covering fire for their former enemies. As they neared the sanctuary of Earth's defensive grid, Mason turned to his XO. "Prep the war room. We need to figure out how the hell we're going to survive this." Hours later, Mason stood before a tense gathering of EDF brass and Riemann leadership. The holograms flickered as he laid out the situation. "The Zarin Collective possesses technology far beyond our own," Mason explained. "Their numbers are vast, and they've been conquering star systems for centuries. We can't hope to match them in a straight fight." Corvus, his carapace still bearing scorch marks from their earlier battle, spoke up. "Then what do you propose, human? Shall we roll over and die?" Mason shook his head. "No, we work together. Pool our resources, our knowledge. Find a weakness we can exploit." He outlined his plan, a joint task force to analyze Zarin tech, a combined fleet to hold the line, and a covert team to infiltrate the enemy command structure. "It's a long shot," Mason admitted, "but it's our only shot." The room erupted in argument, humans and Riemanns alike voicing concerns. Mason let it play out for a moment before slamming his hand on the table. "Enough. Look around you. Our fleets are in tatters. Our worlds are under threat. If we don't stand together now, we won't be standing at all when the Zarin are done with us. Slowly, grudgingly, heads began to nod. Even Corvus gave a sharp click of assent. Then let's get to work, Mason said. We've got a war to win. As the others filed out, Mason turned to the view screen. The Zarin fleet loomed in high orbit, a constant reminder of the threat they faced. He clenched his fist, purpose etched on his face. The real fight was just beginning. The real fight was just beginning. Mason's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical displays showing the vast Zarin armada. He turned to Corvus, who stood beside him on the bridge. "We need to hit them hard and fast," Mason said. "Your intel on their weaknesses could be the key." Corvus clicked his mandibles. "Their primary reactor. It's their Achilles heel." Mason nodded, a plan forming. "We'll need a strike team, our best soldiers, human and Riemann." As they hammered out the details, the combined fleet engaged the Zarin forces. Space lit up with weapons fire. Human and Riemann ships moved in perfect coordination, years of conflict forgotten in the face of a common enemy. Mason led the strike team himself, boarding a stealth shuttle. The craft slipped past the Zarin defenses, latching onto the massive flagship's hull. Mason activated his suit's magnetic boots, stepping out into the void. "Let's move," he said over the comms. They cut through the hull, entering the labyrinthine interior. Zarin troops swarmed towards them. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air. Mason ducked behind a bulkhead, returning fire. Beside him, a Riemann warrior unleashed a barrage from his energy rifle. They fought their way through deck after deck. Sweat poured down Mason's face inside his helmet. His muscles burned with exertion, but they pressed on. Finally, they reached the reactor core. Mason pulled out the high-yield explosives. "Cover me," he ordered. As his team held off waves of Zarin soldiers, Mason worked quickly to plant the charges. Alarms blared throughout the ship. They were out of time. "Charges set! Move!" They sprinted back the way they came, enemy fire nipping at their heels. Mason's lungs burned as he ran. They reached the shuttle just as the first explosions rocked the flagship. The shuttle detached, engines flaring. Behind them, the Zarin vessel broke apart in a series of spectacular explosions. The shockwave buffeted their small craft, nearly sending them tumbling. As they rejoined the fleet, Mason saw the tide of battle turning. Without their flagship, the Zarin forces fell into disarray. The combined human-Riemann fleet pressed their advantage, unleashing a devastating barrage. But the Zarin had one last card to play. A massive energy beam lanced out from a hidden superweapon, cutting through Allied ships like paper. "We need to take that thing out," Corvus snarled. Mason studied the weapon's schematics. "There, the focusing array. If we can hit it with enough firepower." He assembled a squadron of fighters, a mix of human and Riemann pilots. "This is a one-way trip," he told them, "but it's our only shot." They launched, streaking towards the superweapon. Zarin defenses opened up, filling space with deadly energy bolts. Fighters exploded left and right. Mason juked and rolled, avoiding the worst of it. "Almost there," he growled. The focusing array loomed ahead. Mason armed his torpedoes. "All units, fire!" A wall of explosives slammed into the array. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the superweapon's surface began to crack and splinter. Mason's fighter shuddered as debris pelted it. Warning lights flashed across his console. He pushed the craft to its limits, trying to escape the expanding fireball. The superweapon's destruction left a brief silence in its wake. Then, the combined human-Riemann fleet erupted in a thunderous cheer that echoed across comm channels. Mason allowed himself a fleeting smile before refocusing on the task at hand. "All ships, press the attack!" he ordered, his voice firm and unwavering. "The Zarin are in disarray. We hit them now. We hit them hard." The fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. Zarin vessels scattered before them, their formations broken. Mason coordinated the assault from the bridge of the EDF flagship, his eyes darting between tactical displays, as he issued rapid-fire commands. Beside him stood Corvus, the Reman's chitinous fingers dancing across a control panel. "Mason," he clicked, mandibles twitching. "I've identified a critical weakness in their defense grid. Their shipyards. If we can neutralize them, they'll be unable to replenish their losses." Mason studied the data Corvus presented. "A surgical strike," he mused. "It could work, but we'd need a team to infiltrate and plant charges." "I know just the operative," Corvus replied. Hours later, Mason briefed a group of elite soldiers, a mix of hardened EDF veterans and sleek Reman warriors. At their center stood Jax Terrell, a grizzled human with cybernetic enhancements glinting beneath his skin. "This is a black op," Mason explained, gesturing to a holographic schematic of the Zarin shipyards. "You'll be using captured Zarin vessels to slip past their outer defenses. Once inside, your job is simple. Plant charges and blow those shipyards to hell." Jax nodded, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the schematics. "Consider it done, Commander." The strike team boarded their stolen Zarin craft, the alien technology humming beneath their feet. As they approached the massive shipyards, tension crackled through the air. Jax's hand tightened on his weapon. "Incoming transmission," the pilot announced. "They're hailing us." Jax stepped forward. "Let me handle this." He activated the comm, speaking in guttural Zarin. The alien on the other end responded, its tone suspicious. Jax's cybernetic implants worked overtime, processing the language and formulating a response. After a tense exchange, the alien finally granted them clearance. The team disembarked, moving swiftly through the cavernous facility. Zarin workers scuttled about, paying little attention to what they assumed were fellow Zarin in environmental suits. As they neared the central control hub, an alarm blared. "We've been made!" Jax shouted. "Move!" The air filled with plasma bolts as Zarin security forces converged on their position. Jax dove behind a console, returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. Beside him, a Reman warrior unleashed a savage war cry, charging forward with blades extended. They fought their way through deck after deck, leaving a trail of disabled Zarin in their wake. Finally, they reached the primary reactor core. "Plant the charges," Jax ordered. "I'll hold them off." As his team worked, Jax engaged wave after wave of Zarin troops. His cybernetic enhancements pushed his reflexes beyond human limits, allowing him to dodge incoming fire and return devastating blows. "Charges set," a team member called out. "Fall back to the ship," Jax commanded. "Move!" They sprinted through the corridors, alarms blaring all around them. Jax brought up the rear, laying down suppressing fire to cover their retreat. They reached their stolen vessel just as the first explosions rocked the facility. The ship blasted free of the disintegrating shipyards, narrowly avoiding debris as they rejoined the fleet. Behind them, a massive fireball consumed the Zarin's shipbuilding capabilities. On the bridge of the EDF flagship, Mason watched the explosion bloom across his tactical display. He turned to Corvus, a grim smile on his face. "Now we press our advantage. All ships, execute pincer maneuver Alpha. Let's finish this." The combined fleet split into two massive groups. Mason led one prong directly at the heart of the Zarin command ships, while Corvus took the other to smash through their defensive strongholds. Space lit up with weapons fire as the two forces caught the Zarin in a devastating crossfire. Zarin vessels exploded left and right, unable to coordinate an effective defense. Mason's voice crackled over the fleet-wide comm. "All ships, concentrate fire on Sector 7. Punch through their lines." The pincer closed, crushing the Zarin fleet between unstoppable forces. On his command deck, Corvus clicked in satisfaction as another Zarin stronghold crumbled under his assault. Just as victory seemed within reach, space itself seemed to warp. A massive shape emerged from the void, a Zarin dreadnought of impossible size filled with weaponry. "By the spirits," Corvus breathed, his compound eyes widening. The dreadnought opened fire, its weapons tearing through Allied ships smoothly. Panic rippled through the fleet. Mason's eyes sharp as he studied the monstrosity. Corvus, what are we dealing with? The Raymond's claws flew across his console. It's propulsion system, he hissed. There, a weak point in the shielding. If we can hit it with enough firepower. Mason nodded, already formulating a plan. All ships, this is Commander Mason. Concentrate all fire on these coordinates. Every last missile, every energy weapon, everything we've got. The combined fleet unleashed a storm of destructive power, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human and Riemann weapons slammed into the dreadnought's vulnerable point, slowly but surely overwhelming its defenses. Cracks appeared in the massive vessel's hull. Its weapons fire became erratic, then ceased altogether. With a final thunderous explosion, the dreadnought's propulsion system failed catastrophically. The giant ship listed to one side, dead in space. In the stunned silence that followed, Mason and Corvus shared a look of grim satisfaction. The Zaren's last gambit had failed. Now, it was time to end this war once and for all. Mason's eyes scanned the tactical displays, his mind racing with possibilities. He turned to Corvus, the Raymond's chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh bridge lights. We need to hit them where it hurts, Mason said, his voice low and intense. Their supply lines. Cut those off, and we can starve them out. Corvus clicked his mandibles in agreement. A sound strategy, but their convoys are well guarded. Mason's lips curled into a grim smile. That's why we're sending in our best. Hours later, Mason stood before a group of elite pilots, the cream of both human and Riemann forces. At the front stood Zane Ryder, a cocky grin on his face, and Krax, the Riemann ace whose compound eyes gleamed with barely contained excitement. Your mission is simple, Mason explained, gesturing to a holographic map of Zaren-controlled space. Infiltrate their supply lines, hit their convoys, and disappear before they know what hit them. Ryder cracked his knuckles. Sounds like fun, Commander. When do we start? The answer came soon enough. Ryder's stealth fighter slipped through the inky void of space, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to Zaren sensors. Beside him, Krax's vessel moved with equal stealth. Convoy ahead, Krax's voice crackled over the comm. Initiating attack pattern Sigma. Ryder's hands tightened on the controls. Copy that. Let's make some noise. Their fighters burst from the darkness, weapons blazing. The Zaren supply ships, caught completely off guard, exploded in brilliant flashes of light and debris. Ryder whooped as he wove through the chaos, his targeting computer locking onto critical systems. Watch your six, Ryder, Krax warned. Ryder rolled his fighter, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy bolts from a Zaren escort vessel. He grinned, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Thanks for the heads up, buddy. Now watch this. He executed a tight loop, coming up behind the Zaren ship. His finger squeezed the trigger, and a salvo of missiles streaked towards their target. The Zaren vessel erupted in a fiery explosion. As quickly as they had appeared, the strike force vanished back into the void, leaving destruction in their wake. Back on the EDF flagship, Mason nodded in satisfaction as reports of successful raids flooded in. Corvus stood beside him, analyzing the data. The Zaren are diverting significant resources to protect their remaining convoys, Corvus reported. Their frontline forces are weakening. Mason's eyes narrowed. Then it's time for the next phase. Signal the fleet. We're taking the fight to their staging grounds. The combined human-Riemann armada surged forward, a vast array of ships stretching as far as the eye could see. Mason stood on the bridge, issuing rapid-fire commands as they engaged the Zaren's depleted defenses. Battle Group Alpha, push through Sector 7, he ordered. Corvus, take your squadron and flank them from the port side. The space around them lit up with weapons fire. Zaren ships exploded left and right, unable to mount an effective defense against the overwhelming force arrayed against them. As the battle raged, Mason turned to his executive officer. Prepare a strike team. We're going after their command hub. Minutes later, Mason and Corvus led a group of elite soldiers through the corridors of a captured Zaren vessel. They docked with the massive Zaren command station, cutting through the hull with plasma torches. The team fought their way through waves of Zaren defenders, Mason's rifle spitting death as Corvus's blades flashed in the harsh light. They reached the central chamber, and Mason's breath caught in his throat. Before them stood the Prime Overseer, a towering being of otherworldly presence. Its voice boomed in their minds, offering peace in exchange for retreat. Mason's grip tightened on his weapon. "Not a chance," he growled. "We've seen what you do to worlds that surrender." The Prime Overseer's eyes flashed with rage. A wave of psionic energy slammed into them, threatening to overwhelm their minds. Mason gritted his teeth, feeling the pressure build in his skull. But the specialized shielding held. The strike team pushed forward, their weapons trained on the alien leader. In a blur of motion, Corvus leapt forward, his blades finding vulnerable points in the Prime Overseer's defenses. The being collapsed, its psionic assault faltering. Mason stepped forward, securing their prisoner as his team took control of the command hub. "We've done it," Corvus clicked, his mandibles twitching in what Mason had learned to recognize as a smile. Mason nodded, already turning his attention to the wealth of strategic data now at their fingertips. "We've won a battle, old friend. Now let's win this war." As they pored over the Zaren's secrets, coordinates for the aliens' final stronghold flashed on the screen. Mason's eyes hardened with purpose. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "We're going to end this." Mason's eyes flickered across the holographic display, taking in the intricate layout of the Zaren stronghold. He turned to Corvus, the Reman's compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the tactical map. "This is it," Mason said, his voice low and intense. "Their last bastion." Corvus clicked his mandibles in agreement. "We must strike swiftly and decisively." They spent hours poring over the intelligence gathered from the captured command hub, identifying weak points in the stronghold's formidable defenses. Mason's finger traced a path along the outer perimeter. "There," he said, "a blind spot in their sensor coverage. That's our way in." Corvus nodded, already formulating a plan. A small team could exploit that vulnerability. Mason activated the comm. "Terrell, Cracks, report to the war room immediately." Minutes later, Jax Terrell strode in, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned the tactical display. The Reman ace pilot Cracks followed close behind, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh lights. Mason laid out the plan, his voice clipped and precise. "You'll lead a specialized infiltration team. Your objective, disable their primary defensive systems and clear a path for our main assault force." Jax nodded, his cybernetic implants processing the data at inhuman speeds. "We'll get it done, Commander." As Toril and Cracks prepared their team, Mason and Corvus readied the fleet. Thousands of warships, a mix of sleek human vessels and angular Reman craft, formed up in attack formation. The comm channels buzzed with final preparations. Mason's voice cut through the chatter. "All ships, this is Commander Mason. Today we end the Zaren threat once and for all. Stand ready." In the inky void of space, Toril's stealth ship glided silently towards the massive Zaren stronghold. Beside him, Cracks piloted his own vessel with expert precision. They approached the blind spot in the Zaren sensor net, tension crackling through the air. "Initiating cloaking sequence," Terrell murmured, his fingers dancing across the controls. The ships shimmered and vanished from sight, slipping past the outer defenses undetected. They touched down on the stronghold's surface, the infiltration team disembarking with practiced efficiency. Terrell raised his hand, signaling the team forward. They moved swiftly through the alien structure, their footsteps muffled by advanced stealth tech. They reached the first defensive installation, a massive energy cannon capable of decimating entire fleets. "Charge is set," a team member whispered. Terrell nodded. "Move to the next target." One by one, they disabled key defensive systems, clearing the way for the main assault. As the last charge detonated, Terrell activated his comm. "Infiltration successful. Defenses are down." Back on the flagship, Mason's eyes hardened. "All ships, commence attack. Hit them with everything we've got." The human Reman armada surged forward, weapons blazing. Energy beams and missiles streaked towards the Zaren stronghold, hammering its weakened defenses. The space around the massive structure lit up with explosions as the first wave of attacks found their mark. For a moment, it seemed the Zarin had been caught completely off guard. Then, with terrifying speed, their counterattack began. Swarms of fighter craft poured from hidden hangars, while massive warships emerged from concealed docks. Mason's voice rang out over the comm. "Stay focused. Push through their lines." The battle raged, a titanic clash of forces that would decide the hope of the universe. Mason coordinated the assault from the flagship's bridge, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. Beside him, Corvus directed Riemann battle groups with deadly precision. As the fighting intensified, Mason turned to his executive officer. "Prepare the strike teams. We're going in." Across the fleet, elite soldiers readied themselves for boarding actions. They launched in swift assault craft, weaving through the chaos of battle to breach the stronghold's hull. Among them were Zane Ryder and the newly returned Jax Toril, their faces set with grim purpose. The boarding teams fought their way through the stronghold's corridors, engaging in brutal close-quarters combat with Zaran defenders. They targeted critical systems and infrastructure, sowing chaos and destruction in their wake. Mason's voice crackled over the comm. "All teams, converge on the central command complex. We end this now." Led by Mason and Corvus themselves, the strike force fought their way towards the heart of the Zaran stronghold. They encountered fierce resistance, the aliens' elite guard putting up a desperate last stand. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Mason ducked behind cover, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Beside him, Corvus moved with inhuman speed, his blades flashing as he cut down Zaran soldiers. They pushed forward, step by bloody step, until they reached the entrance to the command center. The massive doors buckled under a barrage of concentrated fire, then blew inward with a thunderous boom. As the smoke cleared, Mason and Corvus stepped into the chamber, weapons at the ready. There, towering before them, stood the Prime Overseer, its alien features twisted with rage. "This ends now," Mason growled, raising his weapon. The Prime Overseer's eyes flashed, and the final battle began. The Prime Overseer crumpled to the ground, its alien form twitching in its death throes. Mason lowered his weapon, chest heaving from exertion. Corvus stood beside him, ichor dripping from his blades. "We did it," Mason breathed, surveying the wreckage of the command center. Corvus clicked his mandibles. "The Zaran threat is neutralized." Their victory was short-lived. An urgent transmission crackled through Mason's comm unit. "Commander, we have a problem. A group of Zaran ships just broke through our blockade. They're escaping with stolen tech and weapons." Mason's eyes widened. "Track them. We can't let them get away." Days turned to weeks as Mason and Corvus worked tirelessly to rebuild. They coordinated relief efforts, oversaw reconstruction, and strengthened the human-Riemann alliance. But a shadow loomed over their efforts. In a dimly lit war room, Mason pored over intelligence reports. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes. Corvus entered, his compound eyes reflecting concern. "More disturbing news?" the Raymond asked. Mason nodded grimly. "The escaped Zaran loyalists. They've set up a base on an uncharted world, and they're building something. Something big." He activated a holographic display, revealing schematics of a massive cannon. "A planet killer," Mason explained. "If they finish this thing, no world will be safe." Corvus's antennae twitched. "Then we must act swiftly." They assembled a joint task force, the best of both species. Human ingenuity paired with Riemann cunning. For months, they scoured the galaxy, following leads and infiltrating abandoned Zaran outposts. In a derelict Zaran facility, Jax Toril, his cybernetic eye whirring, decrypted a damaged data core. "Got something," he called out. "Coordinates, buried deep in the code." Krax, the Riemann ace, peered over his shoulder. "A nebula? That's where they're hiding?" Back on the flagship, Mason studied the intel. "It's a death trap," he muttered. "But we have no choice. We go in, we take out that weapon." They devised a daring plan. A stealth ship, piloted by Toril and Krax, would slip past the base's defenses. Meanwhile, the fleet would launch a full-scale assault as a distraction. The stealth ship glided silently through the swirling gases of the nebula. Tyrell's hands were steady on the controls, his cybernetic implants processing vast amounts of data. Beside him, Krax's compound eyes scanned for any sign of detection. They touched down unnoticed on the base's outer hull. Tyrell turned to his team. "Remember the plan. We hit their power grid first, then communications. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late." They moved swiftly through the base's corridors, planting explosives and sabotaging systems. Alarms blared as the first charges detonated, plunging sections of the base into darkness. Outside, the space around the nebula erupted in a maelstrom of weapons fire. Mason's voice rang out over the comm channels. "All ships, engage! Keep them busy while our team does their job." Tyrell and Krax fought their way towards the superweapons control center, dispatching Zarin guards with ruthless efficiency. They burst through the final set of doors, weapons blazing. The control room was a hive of activity. Zarin technicians scrambled to defend their prized weapon. Tyrell's cybernetic eye identified weak points in their defenses, guiding his shots with deadly precision. Krax moved like a blur, his Riemann reflexes allowing him to dodge enemy fire while closing in for devastating counterattacks. As the last Zarin fell, Tyrell rushed to the main console. His fingers flew over the alien controls, his implants translating the complex interface. Suddenly, he froze. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice tight. "There's a failsafe. If we try to shut it down, the whole place goes up, taking us and half the nebula with it." Krax's antennae twitched nervously. "Can you bypass it?" Tyrell shook his head. "Not in time. We need to make a decision." On the flagship, Mason received the dire news. He exchanged a long look with Corvus, the weight of command heavy on their shoulders. The future of the stars hung in the balance, with no easy answers in sight. Mason's hand hovered over the comm button, his squeezing hard with tension. He looked at Corvus, seeking confirmation in the Riemann's compound eyes. Corvus nodded, his mandibles clicking softly. "Do it," Corvus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mason pressed the button. "Tyrell, Krax, I'm sorry, there's no other way." On the other end of the comm, Tyrell's voice came through, steady despite the circumstances. "We understand, Commander. It's been an honor." Krax's chitinous voice followed. "For the galaxy." Mason's voice cracked as he gave the final order. "Initiate self-destruct sequence." In the control center, Tyrell's cybernetic eye whirred as he input the command. A low hum filled the room, building in intensity. Krax moved to stand beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. "It's been a hell of a ride," Tyrell said, a hint of a smile on his weathered face. Krax's antennae twitched in agreement. "Indeed it has, my friend." They watched the countdown tick away on the main display, each second bringing them closer to the end. Tyrell activated his personal comm unit one last time. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft, "I love you. Take care of our daughter." Krax sent his own message, a series of clicks and chirps in the Riemann language, bidding farewell to his hive kin. On the flagship's bridge, Mason and Corvus watched the feed from the stealth ship's external cameras. The base loomed large in the view screen, a menacing structure of alien design. A blinding flash erupted from the heart of the base. The shockwave rippled outward, tearing through the nebula's swirling gases. The flagship shuddered under the force of the blast. When the light faded, there was nothing left but debris and dissipating energy. Mason's fists clenched at his sides, his face a mask of grief and anger. "Contact all ships," he ordered, his voice hoarse. "Push forward. End this." The combined human Reman fleet surged ahead, catching Virak's forces off guard. Leaderless and demoralized, the rogue Zarin crumbled under the onslaught. Ship after ship surrendered or was destroyed. Hours later, Mason stood in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Corvus approached, his footsteps nearly silent on the deck plating. "It's over," Corvus said. Mason nodded, not turning around. But at what cost? They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their decisions pressing down on them. Days passed. The fleet regrouped, tending to their wounded and repairing battle damage. On the flagship's hangar deck, humans and remans gathered for a solemn ceremony. Mason stepped up to a makeshift podium, his dress uniform crisp despite the chaos of recent days. Corvus stood beside him, his exoskeleton polished to a somber sheen. "We are here to honor the fallen," Mason began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Human and Raymond alike, they gave everything to secure our future." He read out the names of the lost, each one a stab of pain. When he reached Toril and Krax, his voice wavered but did not break. As the ceremony concluded, Corvus stepped forward. The assembled crowd murmured in surprise. "I have served as a warrior and a leader," Corvus said, his alien features set in a solemn expression. "But now I choose a different path." He turned to face Mason directly. "I am stepping down from my position of command. My new mission is to build lasting peace between our peoples." Mason's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly recovered. He extended his hand to Corvus, who grasped it in a gesture of unity. "Together," Mason said, his voice strong and clear, "we will honor their sacrifice by building a better future." The hangar deck erupted in cheers, humans and remans alike raising their voices in hope and commitment. As the sound washed over them, Mason and Corvus shared a look of understanding. The real work was just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.